Hello and welcome. The Cloud Council return. We have more time with Anjali Subaraj. She is a great expert in CRM. She knows all about networks and is customer facing. So I would like to dive straight in and talk about your life currently where you are. What's a description of an average day, if such a thing exists for you, Anjali?
I think the average day, it's different now than it was last year, and it was different prior to last year, like it was for many of us. So if my average day is divided into 3 or 4 parts, there is a big chunk of my day which I like to dedicate to thinking through a complex problem, which is to do with whatever architecture challenge I'm solving. So I like to dedicate perhaps 1/3 of my time to think through that problem, to analyze and come up with some kind of way forward. And it's a progressive, it progressively I get to the answer. It's not like there is a eureka moment, that's the answer. I have to think through it. So I try and dedicate some time, a big chunk of my time for that. There is another piece of, or another section of my day goes towards talking to colleagues and helping out, being the sounding board for them, guiding them. They just look for somebody who has been there and done it. And I've been there and done a number of things, not just architecture. For example, I've been part of delivery of digital transformation. So I have a lot of delivery experience as well. How do you estimate the budget? Does this look right? What kind of resources I need? So those kind of questions come up quite often, and I try and be that sounding board for some of my colleagues. And the remaining part, it goes in collaborating and talking, being part of calls, nowadays the video calls, but interacting with colleagues and collaborating to form either the next challenge or solve the existing challenge. And this evening, probably I take time to complete the actions that have come out of the day. So I think it's, if I have to summarize, I like today, a part of my day goes in thinking through a problem, trying to find a way forward. Part of it goes in coaching, being the sounding board for my colleagues so that they can come up with answers themselves. And part of it goes in collaborating with colleagues.
Some of the challenges of digital transformation there you've highlighted will be very familiar to a lot of the people watching this. And rather than go into maybe how you can overcome some of them, can you maybe describe how you would then integrate your thinking with the business more widely? And just, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had experience with Microsoft, with Salesforce, and currently you're at Mars. How do you find a method of integrating your thinking with that of the business strategy and the business more widely?
Okay, so I usually, when I solve problems, there are 2 types of problems. There is either the business leaders, business, we call them owners. They are coming to me with a particular problem, and I like to always start with what is the business use case? What is the business challenge we are trying to solve? So sometimes it is directly interfacing with the business teams and solving problem for them or explaining to them what the solution is. But there is also, I work with technical teams who are very purely technical, like technical architects and developers. And with them, I am then solving technical problems. So that there are 2 different streams, to be honest, that I try to solve problems with. The thinking, I'm at Mars and I work with all technologies. I work with Microsoft and I work with Salesforce, and I work with technologies that go beyond Microsoft and Salesforce. So as an architect, I don't no longer look at a particular technology vendor. As an architect, I am expected to, and I do work with technologies across the board. But the learning that I've had with Microsoft technologies or Salesforce technologies, it all gets embedded into whatever technology problem that I'm solving. So it's that experience and the learning that I've abstracted from specific products of specific vendors that's what gets embedded into the solution that I form.
And you've talked about how you're in a position where you're dealing with the front end and the back end, which you've articulated. So you have a 360 perspective now of the customer. Maybe you could share with us some of the new elements that you've come across, be it the way that broadcast or communities are built on certain platforms, and then how maybe your supply chain even feeds into your thinking.
Okay, so the front end and back end it's a good way to divide, because consumer experience is 360 degree, and it's more than just getting onto the website and just looking at the website. It goes well beyond that. So and describing it as front end and back end is a good way of describing it. So I focus on both ends of the spectrum. The front end is looking at it's more about being omni-channel, because we don't just talk about website anymore. We talk about being able to have the same experience, whether I'm doing mobile apps or I'm going in store. I expect same digital experience that I would expect on a website, for example. So it's an omni-channel experience, which is what I'm focusing on. Then trying also having when you're supporting omni-channel digital strategy, sometimes you have to look at new next generation technologies. Probably the word microservices rings any bells for you. So looking at microservices-based strategies to work in conjunction with the more traditional technologies that are offered by vendors like Microsoft and Salesforce. So how do you make all of them work together at the front end? That's what I'm looking at. So for example, Salesforce has good software to build communities, and how can we integrate that with an omni-channel headless e-commerce platform? So that's one of the challenges. So it's an amalgamation of all the technologies to get the best experience to the consumer at the front end. That's one aspect of the work that I'm doing. At the back end, as you rightfully said, is about the supply chain management, especially as the brand organizations which are also manufacturing, etc. It's a more complex problem to solve than the front end challenge itself. And it also goes deeper into the business model, the operating model. You have to understand about how the supply chain distribution works on the ground before you start talking about digitally transforming it.
So if anyone else is watching and they're in D2C or looking at technology, what have you learned that maybe you could share with us about something like balancing the supply chain with the customer community, in terms of even internally in the business, the different architects who are looking at technical solutions, business strategies? Have you got a secret formula you can share with us about managing that process?
I think you have to think the strategy holistically. So you have to think holistically, you have to think long term, but then you have to prioritize, and the execution has to be based on the priority. Where are the most pain points? What's the maximum, which is the area that will give you the maximum gain? And more often than not, it turns out to be the front end. Then let's start from there, but then let's not lose sight of that we have to holistically transform our back end as well. And that's the lesson learned, that don't lose sight of the back end. The operational back end is as important in D2C as is the front end.
And you talk about customer 360 mindset, and on previous episodes of the Cloud Council with many other guests, personalization is so important, but you have a great line that loyalty is a cliche. What did you mean by this? Is it that you have to build fundamentally trust, as opposed to just assuming that people are going to be loyal to you because you're available?
Yes, I think loyalty is a cliche. I don't even subscribe to loyalty programs anymore. It's about keeping that consumer engaged. It's the brands that need to be loyal to a consumer than the consumer being loyal to a brand. And that's the mindset that the brands have to develop now. And if that means that if for that consumer to stay with me, I have to introduce the consumer to other brands, to occasionally to my competitors, that's too far-fetched, but I think that's the mindset that we have to develop. What does the consumer want, or what does the consumer need? And then serving those needs. So the brands have to be loyal to or focus on the consumer rather than consumer being loyal to the brands.
So in a couple of moments, I just want to ask you about the UK, because you've got a wonderful global perspective on what we're good at and maybe what we could do more with. And just before we do, I wanted to talk about people, because within any organization you've been in, I would imagine there's a friction between tech roles, people jostling for position. Do you have a playbook for managing this dynamic within an organization? Because from the technologists to the strategists, we really have shifted in the last 10 years to all being digital businesses. So how have you managed to handle that dynamic, given the essence of an architect's role is in the middle of the two?
I think there is always it's human nature to compete. It's human nature to feel insecure, and the competition comes out of insecurities, and that's going to continue and exist. To deal with it is to rise above it and focus inward, focused on your strengths. Don't focus on insecurities of others. Focus on your own strengths and your own securities. And that's the way to rise above it. I think that's for the individuals. But when it comes to the business leaders, they or the organization leaders, I wouldn't say business leaders, organization leaders, they also need to learn to go beyond this competing insecurities and securities of individuals. So I think there is a lot of learning to be done there, because they are also people. So they fall for their own insecurities maybe. So they also have some learning to do. How do you rise above these insecurities that drives all the competition?
How best can business tech leaders communicate strategy within a bigger organization, would you say? Or how could they do it better?
That's a better question. I think strategies, I've seen two trends. One trend is where strategies happen in ivory towers, using maybe MBA graduates who have I'm just using, I don't mean disrespect to MBA graduates, it's fine. I'm just using that as a cliche. Or people who are just doing PowerPoints and have no real understanding or feel for the business, they do that. Or the second is you just throw strategy into the mix and let it happen. So those are the two spectrums I've seen. I think there is a middle ground, because forming a strategy is probably, I wouldn't say easy, but it takes less resources. It's again going back to my physics example. Doing theoretical physics is not easy, but it takes less number of people. It's less investment. You just need the brain power and you can come up with a strategy. But then operationalizing that strategy, communicating, making sure that the organization is with you, that's where the challenges lie, and how there is a huge amount of scope for improvement in that area. And it's a very difficult balance to find, because if you take an organization as large as Mars, it will take ages to make sure that strategy that has been formed is communicated and everybody is on board. But at the same, so you can't wait for that to happen by the time you are forming new strategy, because something new has happened. But at the same time, if you don't take people with you, then that strategy will not be successfully implemented. So that's the challenge, I think, that finding that balance about how do you communicate this strategy across the organization and make sure that people are behind that strategy. That's the challenge that organization leaders have, and every organization will have to come up with what works for them.
Well, that's a great way to lead into a quick chat really about the UK. We find ourselves with a lot of companies funding themselves from here and understanding product here, but you've spoken previously about possibly we could do better as a nation when it comes to developing our own products, and that maybe the Nordic countries or Lisbon or Madrid are actually developing ideas. So recognizing what companies need to do strategically is important, but can you just give us a context as you see it of where the UK excel and maybe where we have some gaps to fill?
I go back to where UK excels, and we have to work to our strengths rather than emulating what our European or American cousins are doing. If they're good at developing products, let it be. What are we good at? We are primarily a service industry, whether it's financial services or retail or public sector utilities. We are a service industry, and digitally transforming our service organizations, whether it's public sector or private sector, that's what we are good at. And I also think that UK, we do it in a safe and a conservative manner. So let others develop the products, the tech products, it's fine. But how do we utilize that to make our businesses successful? That's where UK can focus. I think last year has been a great example where we have seen a lot of digital transformation in public sector, like our healthcare, NHS. We have realized, we have launched the new app for COVID testing, or I realized that GP app, appointment app, has been so useful. So we have been transforming our public sector to reach the masses, and we are very good at that. Or giving laptops to children. Education is now digital, it's not in classroom. So that's an example of digital transformation. So UK has a social conscience. We are very public sector focused. We are very service oriented, and which is good. We just need to make sure that we digitally transform our universe. And now that we are out of EU, we get the opportunity to focus on our own nation, our own people, and making sure that everybody within the country has access to digital technology is important. And that's what I think UK will excel at. And last year has proved that we can do. If it was a need that forced us to do it, but we did it, and that needs to continue.
A really lovely and positive way to wrap up a fascinating section, spending some time with you, Anjali. So thank you very much for joining us. And if you would like to click onto the next episode, whichever way it is, I'm not sure, we have got some fascinating insight into Anjali's development of herself and how you can maybe coach yourself to a more senior position or a more enjoyable role within your own organization. So thank you for joining us on the Cloud Council. We look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.